Should I start? So, all right. Hey, everyone who's joining us live from YouTube at the moment. What's up? How are you? My name's Allison. I'm the youth training coordinator for Project Mia, and so excited to welcome y'all to our 2-day mini Institute for our Abolitionist Youth Organizing Institute, AONYC. Really excited about the session we have today, facilitated by Ruby and Gillian. And before we get into that, I want to start with just a few announcements to really ground us in the space and some thank yous. So I want to start by naming that if you're joining us from our live stream, you're also able to join via Zoom. For folks who registered through Eventbrite, please look out for an email that will have the link for you to be able to join in our Zoom directly. And you can also reach out via email for that link. We'll also be pulling questions from the YouTube if you are staying on the live stream, so don't worry, your questions will be brought into this space. But we do encourage, if you are using the closed captioning or the ASL interpretation, to join us via Zoom. And we wanna start by also thanking our fiscal sponsor, Flux Factory, for supporting us with hosting the Institute this year, and also the Barnard Center for Research on Women for supporting us with our live stream to YouTube. So just want to start by naming also who's in the room. Again, I'm Allison. We also have Paige, who is supporting with gathering resources in the chat and answering questions, as well as Ebene, who is doing our tech support for today. And Miriam is also in the space as well. Sorry, I didn't put you on the slide, Miriam. I didn't know you would be here. But Miriam is also here, founder and director of Project Mia. And then we have our supporters. We have ASL interpretation from Trisha, Cameron, and Glashanda during this session today, and also captioning, closed captions from Teddy. So again, encouraging folks, if you are joining us via the live stream at the moment, to please join us via Zoom. You can reach out to the email in the description of the YouTube live stream to get that Zoom link, or check your email if you registered through Eventbrite. And then we also have Laura doing amazing graphic notes for us today for you to take beyond this space. So just reminding folks of our values in this space that we're holding: humility and courage, interdependence, responsibility and accountability, sharing and sustainability, integrity and connection, compassion, healing, trust, transformation, and growth, and also liberation, and being grounded in possibility. And then also our commitments of really, and I'll just hone in on a few of those, of really actively and deeply listening in this space, because we are going to be talking about how to engage in some challenging conversations today, as Ruby and Gillian guide us through that. And then also asking questions and really being generative and generous in our sharing in the chat and what we're offering, and remaining curious in this space. Also, it is a 3-hour session, so please, there will be breaks throughout. Our facilitators have been so intentional about making space for that. And we also want to remind you to take a break when you need it, nourish yourself, tend to yourself, care for yourself. And I believe on my end, that is pretty much it. Before I turn it over to our facilitators for today, I do want to name that we do have an Institute Padlet that is accessible to everybody, that has materials, resources around organizing and abolition from the larger institute that we've been doing over the past almost 2 weeks. And we'll also have resources posted from this session. So strongly encourage folks to check that out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators for today to share their screen, introduce themselves, and start us with session today.
All right, I'm sorry, things broke up a little bit, but I think we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Welcome everybody. We are so incredibly thankful and happy that you're here today with us. Welcome to the workshop. And yeah, today we are going to be talking about having compelling conversations about abolition with our friends and family. And really the framing we're going to work with today is this idea around inviting your community to a future without prisons and police. And so we really want to thank Project Mia and everybody here today, as well as everybody who has been doing this work for lifetimes well before we came here, and will be doing this work for lifetimes well beyond when we go. This is definitely part of a process, and we're really happy to be here with you today. Just a brief image description for the slide deck that we're using today. We're using a slide deck with a white background, black text, and accents in orange, yellow, and blue. And I'd like to start by just inviting anybody who's here in the Zoom with us, or maybe if you're watching on YouTube, to write in the chat, what will your community role be when we're living in the future that we deserve? So what will your role be whenever we win everything that we deserve and everything that we've struggled for? When we have a world without prisons and police, and when our needs are met, what's that community role going to be? What do you want to see yourself doing in that future? Go ahead and maybe write a few answers in the chat if something comes to mind. I think my community role would probably be that I want to help to plan and throw big parties and celebrations where we get to celebrate and heal and create together, and also where we grieve in community and where we process our anger and our fear, maybe even have parties around our conflicts. I like to picture a future where we have a lot of different ways to feel our full emotions in community and together. Gillian, what do you think your role would be in this future?
Oh man, you know, I think I'm a person of many hats. I'm definitely creative, and I see myself creating things that reflect the moment. But I also am very drawn to death work. So I definitely really care about like holding folks who are at end of life processes, and also like holding grief in general.
Beautiful, thank you so much for sharing. All right, so as you're all typing your future roles into the chat, we're going to go ahead and just start with a digital land acknowledgement. Gillian's going to read that for us.
Okay, so I'm going to read the land acknowledgement, and this land acknowledgement is created by Andrea Wong to acknowledge digital land spaces. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology structures and ways of thinking that we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in most Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leaves a significant carbon footprint and is contributing to the changing climate that disproportionately affects Indigenous people worldwide. I invite you to join us in this acknowledging all this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, colonization, and allyship.
Thank you so much, Gillian. All right, so maybe just take a moment to sit with the reality that we've all been living in over the past year and a half, that digital resources have allowed us to connect, and also that we, coming into the future, also need to consider making these digital spaces more accessible and less harmful, and more in alignment with our values. So thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, Gillian?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so my name's Gillian. My pronouns are they, we, this, and pictured is a picture of me in my glorious undercut days with my nose ring and a blue shirt with stripes. I'm a light-skinned Black person, a Black non-binary person. And like to know more about me, I'm a creative and community member from unceded OBGYN, and specifically like I struggle with land acknowledgement sometimes because there are so many people who've like lived on this land, like the Ottawa tribe and the Potawatomi tribe and so many others that I can't like name at this moment. I'm most known for a lot of the writing that I've done. I've published through like Bodies in Anthropology and the Black Youth Project, and I've done some writing on disability through Mobility International. And I really center my work around dismantling ableism, anti-Blackness, homophobia, and transphobia. I've done like some panelist work and webinar work, like really making sure that like those systems like are dismantled and just talking about those things. Yeah, I've been a part of like various different community efforts. And right now, like the real center and like motivation between all that work is really like seeing like the future of abolition and really like trying to shape a future around that and radical self-love and like liberation for all of us.
Thank you, Gillian. And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ruby Pinto, and I use she or they pronouns. And I am a queer organizer and artist, and I identify as having mixed racial ancestry with both colonized and colonizer ancestors, and both enslaved and enslaver ancestors. So I have a very complicated relationship to my history, to where I come from, and to the potential for my future. I'm based on Osage land, also known as Charleston, West Virginia. And I also call Pittsburgh and Chicago home. I travel quite a bit between those three places. I had the honor of spending a decade in Chicago where I learned to organize within movements for racial, economic, and queer liberation with a focus on prison and police abolition, working on campaigns like No Cop Academy, Free Brescia, and the fight to end cash bail and pretrial incarceration. And I'm really enthusiastic about building a world where our basic needs are decommodified, where nobody is profiting from our basic needs, and where every person has access to joy, safety, comfort, and care. And I really believe that creative collaboration and care hold vast potential in building strong communities and a safer, more peaceful world for all of us. And I do this work because I've been impacted by incarceration. When I was born, my father was on house arrest, and he is a white man. And I am almost certain that if he were Black, he would have been incarcerated through much of my childhood. And so I understand that I got to have my father in my life because he benefited from a white supremacist criminal legal system. But I also experienced violence and abuse growing up, and I do not believe that anyone being in a cage would have been an appropriate response or an effective solution to any of these situations. I've lost family members and loved ones to state violence and incarceration, and I just want to do everything in my power to end the state's ability to cage and harm us. So I also work in mental health care, and I consider that work an extension of my abolitionist practice. And to describe myself visually, I have very light skin and really curly hair. It's about down to my shoulders, and it's brown. And today I'm wearing a kind of burnt orange t-shirt. And on the slide is a picture of me in my garden, kneeling next to a big banana plant. And I'm wearing a black shirt and a multicolored skirt. There's a blue sky above me and my dad's house with dull white paint behind me. So that's who we are. Let's talk about our agenda for today. So right here we are in the intro. We're going to talk a little bit about what to expect, maybe do some grounding and orienting. We'll do a little stretch breaks all throughout. And then we'll talk about the power of narrative, or how prisons and police show up in our dominant narratives in media and in mythology, and why it's so important to build better narratives that invite our communities to understand and work toward abolition. We'll go over some methods on how to develop compelling narratives to reach the people you most want to connect with, as well as the power of asking compelling questions. We'll talk a lot about curiosity and questions today. We'll take a 15-minute break in the middle of our workshop or right after that composing compelling narratives piece. And then Gillian's going to talk about how we can investigate and understand our own underlying motivations in making moves to talk about abolition with our community, and how we can orient around grounding ourselves in our values as we have these conversations, and try to move away from domination as a method of connecting with our community through conversation. And finally, we'll talk about just a few resources to support yourself and others in conversations that might require vulnerability or bring up strong emotions. So we'll have some time at the end for questions. Our moderators are keeping track of those for us, so please feel free to use that Q&A function and send us questions. We'll try to leave a lot of time at the end. And we'll wrap up by 3 EST, 2 Central today. If you don't already have something nearby, please take a moment now while we're here in the intro to find a journal, or maybe pull up a blank document on your computer, or maybe just the Notes app on your phone. We're going to be inviting you to journal at least 3 times today. And so however you want to record those thoughts is fine, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. But we definitely recommend, if you can, actually finding a way to record it, because you're going to come out with some really valuable and cool understandings of at least yourself, if not abolition in general. And we'd like to frame today as having everything be totally invitational. So if we invite you to try something that you don't want to do today or that doesn't seem interesting, just feel free to take a pass. If you need a break, take a break. And if the material becomes heavy, do take care. We really respect your wisdom, and we're so glad you're here. So everything is just an invitation today, and we look forward to seeing how you feel like engaging. Gillian and I have built this workshop from our own experiences and the abundant wisdom of those who have been doing this work well before and alongside us. So we may frame things in ways that don't resonate with you, or in ways that feel incomplete. Every single person present today on this call, all of you listening, everybody in your own life and beyond, we all really bring valuable and unique perspectives to this work. And we look forward to any feedback you have to offer. We will all continue to be transformed as we learn and grow. We're really thankful for the opportunity to present this workshop for the very first time to you all today. We're pretty proud and also anxious to see how it's received. So we spent a lot of time questioning what to say and how to say it. And we had some really helpful support from comrades and friends along the way. And of course, there's so much more to explore than we could possibly cover in just this 3 hours. Obviously, this work happens over lifetimes. So this is part of an ongoing process. I so look forward to learning. And again, we'll talk about this a little later, but there's really no binary between success and failure. There's always things to learn from every experience. And so we are really thankful to be able to learn from and with you today. So let's just take a moment, if it feels interesting, to try an exercise called orienting. And this is a way that we can kind of sometimes settle our nervous systems, feel a little bit more at ease, or maybe a little bit just more aware of our surroundings, a little bit more alert. So with everything we'll do during this workshop, only do this if you want to. And if you try it and you find that you don't like it, just feel free to stop or pause or do something else. But if it feels interesting, let's just take a moment to observe the space that we're in. So go ahead and look around the room that you're in, or maybe you're outside. And go ahead and take a look and actually move your head and neck, and really move your eyes around the room. Or perhaps really deeply listen. You can even close your eyes and notice what you might be hearing to the right of you or to the left. Take a moment to look up at the ceiling or down at the floor. Maybe turn around and notice what's behind you. Give your system a chance to really take the environment in. Maybe if you have a window you can look out of, see how far you can look. What's the farthest point you can see? And maybe you might notice that the temperature in the room is really pleasant, or maybe you're a little chilly and it might be a good idea to get a blanket, or maybe you're hot, maybe you want to turn a fan on. Go ahead and make any adjustments that might help you feel a little more comfortable, supported, and able to feel present for as long as you'd like to be present today. And thanks for trying that with me. Again, that's an exercise called orienting, and it has a lot to do with how whenever we're calm, we take information in. And if we're stressed out, we have a little bit less of an ability to take information in because we're protecting ourselves. And so it's really nice to take a moment when we are engaging in conversation to assess if there's any way that we could feel more comfortable and safe and ready to engage and connect with whoever we're talking to. So thank you. Here are just a few things to expect from today's workshop. We'll start obviously with some framing of how abolition is showing up in conversations and media already. And we'll share some tools to help you craft strong abolitionist narratives. You can expect some prompts to help you plan and prepare for intentional conversations. You can expect resources to help you gauge and expand your capacity to hold complex conversations and center safety and respect. And you can also definitely expect unfinished business. This is a topic that spans very wide and goes very deep. We're just a few folks with our own experience and perspectives. This is just one workshop. Unfinished business is the name of the game. So definitely a lot of things might be opened and not many things might be totally closed in a neat package today. Here's what not to expect. And just to be clear about what we're providing today and what you might want to look elsewhere for if you're looking for something like this. So we're not going to be talking today necessarily about a set of correct or rigid talking points about prisons, police, and abolition. We will talk a little bit about how to navigate talking points and respond to them and assess what they really mean, but we're not going to really give you a list of correct ways to talk about abolition. We're not going to be providing a strategy to win a debate about abolition. Now, of course, debate is very common and it can be very useful in some cases, but it's not our main focus today. We're not focused on winning. Today, we're going to focus on compelling, caring, and transformative discussions between people who share community. We are not going to be offering super detailed resources on how to navigate discussions about interpersonal harm. Now, of course, these conversations often come up, and I highly recommend checking out all of the resources that Project Nia and Miriam and so many others have been working on and crafting for years. We'll talk about this a little bit, but definitely check out the Abolitionist Toolbox, your Padlets, all kinds of other resources. And I also highly recommend actually listening to and reading interviews with Miriam Kaba and others that touch on this subject. Specifically, I recently listened to the conversation between Miriam and Prentice Hemphill on the Finding Our Way podcast, and I really found it helpful and grounding to actually listen to people talking in real time rather than trying to read an article and integrate the facts myself. So if you like conversations and listening to them, I highly recommend listening to the Finding Our Way podcast, the interview with Miriam. We're also not going to be providing any specific guides for conflict resolution. Again, there are a lot of amazing resources out there. I recommend pursuing training if you want to take that kind of role seriously. And I also highly recommend Kai-Ching Tom's Loving Justice, Embodied Conflict Resolution and Transformative Justice, and other workshops on restorative and transformative justice if you want more details on this topic. All right, and of course, we always want to encourage you to make your own resources. So along with all of the amazing things that you can find here and elsewhere, think today about how you might create your own resource if you can't find one you're looking for. All right, that's the intro. Let's take a little stretch break if it feels interesting. If you want to take a final moment to get up and get a glass of water, maybe find that journal if you haven't already, or a piece of paper and a pen. I'm gonna go ahead and take a sip of water. Take a nice deep breath. I'm gonna watch this bunny stretch out here because it makes me really happy. That twitchy nose. And again, stretching and breathing and noticing if we're comfortable can really help us to be present in conversations and to take new information in and to share information. So whenever I'm having conversations with people, sometimes I dance around a lot. I kind of move. I kind of let my body do what it wants to do if I feel safe and comfortable to do that. And so I invite you to do any kind of movement if it feels interesting. Just kind of let your system do what it wants to do. You might get bored, you might get tired, you might even fall asleep. That's all totally fine. But just go ahead and lean into noticing how your body wants to move whenever you're engaged. All right, so we're going to start here by talking about the power of narrative and why narrative is such an important site for building power to bring about a future where prisons and police are obsolete and absent. So this is a drawing of Octavia Butler, who is a really incredible Afrofuturist science fiction writer whose work has shaped many people's ideas of what the past means, what the present holds, and what the future might be. And the quote here says, "Every story I create creates me. I write to create myself." Narrative is a huge part of how we know ourselves, each other, and our world. And the ability to make meaning of time, history, present, future, our environment, events, things that happen to and with us, and so on. That's really what allows us to plan and strategize with ourselves and each other to bring something into reality. So if you have a plan that you want to communicate to somebody about, building a strong narrative so that they can actually picture what you're talking about can go so far in actually being able to work together and plan and strategize and identify paths between where we are and where we want to be. So the art on this slide is by Octavia Mingerink, and it shows Octavia Butler in a yellow shirt with a small crown over her head. There's a purple background and planets and stars around white text in a black text bubble. So again, every story I create creates me. I write to create myself. And I would say this expands to we have conversations to create ourselves and create our communities and create our future. So on this slide, we see an image by my dear friend, Monica Trinidad. The background is purple and teal with stars. And we see a few people kind of sitting around the frame. One person is here in a window holding up a sign that says, "We need each other." Another person is seated working on their laptop. It looks like they're raising money. There are little dollar signs on their laptop screen. We see another person talking on the phone. And then finally, we see a person standing with groceries, probably delivering some mutual aid during the pandemic. I know Monica drew this during the pandemic, and you can see this person's wearing a mask. And so let's talk, and the text right here in the middle says, "We keep each other safe." So narratives and how we make meaning of the world are in really deep connection to our emotions. And a powerful narrative evokes really powerful emotions, even if it's not obvious that that's what's happening. The dominant narrative, the story that we're told about why we need police, prisons, and punishment, runs on emotional manipulation, specifically of one of our most core emotions, fear. So fear of other humans, fear of different cultures and behaviors, fear of different beliefs, fear of punishment and isolation, fear of the unknown, fear of scarcity, and even fear of ourselves. There are so many stories that we encounter every day about how scary the world is, how scary other people are, how scary the future will be if the state, the powerful, or the wealthy lose the ability to control people. So those who maintain their power with the use of punishment and incarceration have worked really hard to monopolize or possess the definition of safety, right? They call themselves peace officers. They call prisons corrections or rehabilitation centers as if they're offering some kind of solution or care. They say their job is to serve and protect. They cast themselves as heroes in a world where the rest of us are either villains or victims. And so in the dominant narrative, the future is either law and order or violent chaos. And we know, all of us on this call know, that those are not our only two options for the future. And we know that as things are now, safety actually is not available for the vast majority of people. So perhaps one of the most powerful lies ever told and one of the most powerful emotional manipulations that's going on currently is the idea that prisons and police keep us safe. And one of the first questions people always ask abolitionists is, how will we be safe without prisons and police? So that very question is the result of a strategic and really well-funded effort to tell a false story about safety. And it indicates just how powerful it can be to tell a different story or many different stories, stories that reframe safety and name how the current system harms us rather than helps us. So we can use narrative to define safety for ourselves, and we can build narratives that don't depend on unexamined fear. Of course, fear will be present. It's a very core emotion, but we can actually look at that fear with clarity and be curious about it, be honest about it. We don't have to depend on unexamined or manipulated fear, intimidation, or domination. We can do this work as individuals. We can build these narratives ourselves, But narratives become a lot stronger when we do this collectively. So the dominant narrative is sustained by a lot of money and time, a deep legacy and investment in white supremacy, punishment, making sure that we have people who are afraid and unstable enough to take low-wage jobs or to remain in abusive situations. There's a lot of money and time going into maintaining that dominant narrative. But I actually don't think that narrative is all that creative. I think it's pretty flat. I think it's pretty boring. I think it's not very deep. It's just very emotionally intense. And it really depends on us believing that the world is divided into good people and bad people, or safe people and dangerous people. It depends on us to believe that punishment works to reduce harm. And I don't see evidence of that. I don't even see compelling arguments. I don't even see creative arguments that really express how exactly punishment has been proven to eliminate or reduce harm. So it really depends on a lack of imagination on our part, and a lack of understanding of how we are involved already in our own safety, in creating our own safety for ourselves and others. So we should be investing in our narratives and nurturing and strengthening them in order to free ourselves and each other from this dominant narrative. And we can tell better stories about who we are and what the world we deserve is and how the world could be and how we can get there. So let's start writing that story right now about what safety really means to us. Here's the prompt, and we'll take about 3 minutes here. The prompt is, describe what safety feels like for you. Where you feel safe, what or who helps you to feel safe, and how might we build more safety together? There's really no wrong way to do this. You can write a few sentences, you can make a list of bullet points, you can draw a picture, you can even just sit and think. You don't have to write anything down. But if you're interested in writing something down or drawing a picture, making a list, go ahead and just take a few moments and think about this prompt. What does safety feel like for you? And we'll give about 3 minutes here. And maybe we have some nice sound to play while folks are journaling, if that's possible. We're about halfway through, by about another minute and 30 seconds here to journal. All right, we're going to move on, but if you're interested in continuing to journal, please feel free to keep writing while we keep talking, or you can always come back to this prompt anytime. You can ask anybody in your life what safety means for them. I found that it's a really interesting conversation that we can have with ourselves and other folks. I just want to give a little bit of context for the next slide. There is going to be an image of protest from last spring. I know some folks have intense memories from that time of year, so I just wanted to ground you and let you know that there's going to be a picture of some fire and some protest on the next slide. So let's frame the moment that we're in here. Over the last several years, and especially since the uprisings in 2020, police violence and our resistance to it has become more widely reported on in the mainstream media, and therefore more common in our regular conversations. The murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless others sparked massive, powerful uprisings and prompted major shifts in how a lot of people understand and talk about policing. There's been a really significant expansion of awareness and engagement around ending police violence and incarceration. And of course, mainstream media is not accurately reporting on the rich history and the brilliant organizing currently happening toward abolition, toward building a world where we don't have prisons or police. We've heard a lot of both sides reporting, both sides over the past several years. And in fact, news media almost always sticks to the dominant narrative that cops are heroes standing between good people and dangerous people. There are also, if you haven't noticed, a ton of cop shows and shows about prisons that weave fantasy narratives about how heroic policing is and how normal prisons are, how normal it is that so many people would be in a cage, and how normal your life can be when you're in a cage in a prison. And so there's a lot of not only direct news media and reporting, but very well-funded and abundant entertainment narratives that kind of provide a narrative for us that fits with the dominant narrative of prisons and police being normal, good, inevitable. So there are a few resources on propaganda in the Padlet attached to this workshop if you'd like a more deep dive on how this shows up in news and entertainment, and if you want to maybe think of some starting points to talk to your friends and family who maybe even watch some of these shows. But as people who understand that the system cannot be reformed and must be dismantled, we can actually help our people to identify false narratives as well as the pitfalls of reform efforts, and invite them to think beyond the carceral system with us. So we can do this by having intentional conversations rooted in abolitionist understandings and values, compelling and spacious enough to win people over from the idea that police and prisons are necessary. Again, there's an ongoing, well-funded, never-ending amount of options to confirm the dominant narrative, and we get to provide something to win people away from that and let them know that something else is possible. So talking to those close to us is a way to kind of navigate an ever-transforming narrative landscape. We saw huge transformations last year, and I know I personally had a lot of friends reaching out to me who had been curious about abolition, but didn't really know how to talk about it before, and then realized they needed to know how to talk about it. And so there's a really beautiful opportunity here to kind of anchor for these people in our lives who maybe weren't open to abolition just a few years ago, but who are now primed to imagine this world. We can kind of anchor that exploration for them. And so there are, of course, far too many people still fully bought into false narratives that enable state violence. But there are many more nooks and crannies and crevices and fissures in the dominant narrative now than there previously were. So we can explore all kinds of tactics to win hearts and minds. And when we have conversations, we're engaging in the art of narrative. We're telling stories about ourselves, our experiences, our people, other people, the world, our beliefs. And humans are naturally narrative creatures. We find meaning in stories. Babies love stories even before they have language. And communities often develop around shared narratives. Strong community identities often have a lot to do with the stories that we share that form our worldviews and beliefs. So storytelling is how we pass on knowledge, culture, and relationships. It's how we know ourselves and each other. And it's, again, a deeply emotional act that shapes our actual behavior. It's also used by really powerful people to maintain power and enforce beliefs that benefit them. And this is a really beautiful piece of art by Ashley Lukashevsky, The text says, remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within. And that's a quote from Ruha Benjamin. And the image here is two people embracing. The person on the left is drawn in green hues, and the person on the right is drawn in orange with pink hair. And they are embracing, and there are flowers between them and flames all around them. And the text is pink on a black background. So these are the kinds of conversations that can happen in community. We can simultaneously name how much it hurts to live this way and how much we long for something better, and then imagine that something better together. And we can create, or in many cases, return to and remember something better by inviting our people to dream with us as it becomes more and more clear to more and more people that this system is not safe or healthy for us. We can be anchors for this transformation. And of course, we ourselves will be transformed through these conversations. And one big difference I've observed, again, coming back to this curiosity piece, is that in conversations based on the dominant narrative versus conversations that free us from that dominant narrative, these kinds of conversations tend to be much less about being correct or having a solution to every problem, and much more about being curious, recognizing differences as inevitable, and recognizing that multiple perspectives can be valid at the same time, and that multiple resources and interventions are going to have to happen if we hope to actually reach the future that we deserve. So we'll talk more about how to get comfortable with holding contradictions and uncertainties a little later, but there's just so much value in practicing not having to be right, and that is an ongoing practice for me. So much of how we learn about communication and information really relies on us being able to dominate that information and dominate others with the ability to define reality. And so these conversations often are more efficient if we learn to get a little loose with our need to be correct at all times. All right, so that is the power of narrative. Here we are again with our cute bunny. We're gonna have a little stretch break here. Thank you all so much for being present with us. I know I'm talking a lot. I've got one more section to go. We'll take a break, and then Gillian's going to join us and speak about some really great stuff too. But for now, I'm gonna shake it out. I'm gonna have a drink of water. Give my eyes just a short break from the screen. Maybe you'd like to do the same if you want to close your eyes for a moment. Maybe thank your eyes for doing so much work today and over the past year and a half, or your ears, your sensory input, your nervous system for keeping you here and present and able to receive and engage. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the art of composing compelling narratives. So how can we tell strong stories that our friends and family can relate to, can be moved by, and can see themselves in as characters, right? The dominant narrative says that we are passive, we are victims, and we need this carceral system to keep us safe from villains. So we want to tell stories that provide different roles for people in our communities, other than victim or villain, or even hero. We might want to move away from the idea that a hero is necessary, or that heroes are what we need to get out of the situation that we're in and to build something better. How can we tell a story about who we are, what's happening, and what we think should be happening instead, and how to get there? So this is an image from an organization that I work with called Center for Story-Based Strategy. And at CSS, we use tools to understand dominant narratives and to build our own really strong narratives to help move people to take action and win campaigns. And it really goes beyond simply winning campaigns and changing policy or building bases. Story-based strategy provides tools to help us transform the narrative landscape, to take charge of how we actually define and understand reality, and define and understand and believe in what's possible. The image here is a purple and pink night sky with dark purple mountains, and the Little Dipper constellation is drawn out. And the text reads, "We are the narrative animal with the unique power to imagine and manifest new choices, to write new stories together." So that's a quote from the Center for Story-Based Strategy. And if you're interested in some of the really specific tools we use, please go ahead and check out the resources included in the Padlet for this workshop, or you can visit CSS online at storybasedstrategy.org. And there are some free downloads of information and also some tips on workshops and trainings. If you're interested in having a training or working with us, we'd love to work with you. So many of these tools and worksheets are actually really helpful when sitting down to plan out campaign messaging or a media piece. If you have a lot of time and space to sit down with your people and really plan out a detailed story, these tools can be really, really helpful in making sure that you have a strong narrative that you're telling. But today I'm going to cover a few of the more basic or adaptable processes or tools that I've found most useful in real-time conversation. And I think most of these tools are something that we use already, whether we actually know it or not, whether we call them using tools or not. It's just stuff that we probably do whenever we're actually engaged in the conversation we want to be having, or when we're actually curious and trying to learn something. But they're really helpful in communicating in ways that will reach and engage people. So I'm going to talk through a few of those. So we all see the world through narrative lenses. I'm going to play this little kitty cat GIF here. We all see the world through narrative lenses that are formed by our culture, our environment, our life experiences, and so on. You might also call these lenses our filters. And these kind of shape what we know and how we process our world, how we process all the information that we take in every day. These might be our assumptions, things that we believe without actually knowing we believe them. Sometimes these are really obvious. For example, obviously Gillian and I planned this workshop assuming that probably everyone here today at least sees a big problem with policing. Even if we don't all share the exact vision and definition of abolition, we planned this information to land well with people who already have a narrative lens that tells them policing and prisons are not okay. So that's a shared narrative lens. Other times, these filters are not so obvious or not shared. For example, we might all have really different ideas of how to define things like harm, punishment, or even justice. So our understandings of these dynamic processes are influenced by our various narrative lenses, and we all have them. I actually don't really believe that we are capable of overcoming having these. I think we can be aware of them, but we'll always have them. So they're not good or bad. They're just a great thing to be aware of and to kind of play with and use whenever you're building your engaging narratives. So it's important to really understand our own and others' narrative lenses and how they impact what we believe to be true and therefore how we take action in the world. So you can have all of the correct facts, data, statistics, anecdotes, but they might be almost totally powerless or even backfire if you don't frame them in a way that can be understood and believed through someone's narrative lens. We talk a lot about having correct statistics, looking at all of the research and all of the studies and all of the evidence that prisons and police do not keep us safe. And yet here we are, even after the year of uprisings we've had, seeing bills passed in the name of people who have been killed by the state, providing more funding for the state. So obviously being correct isn't enough. We do need to consider the narrative lens and our beliefs and how that impacts how we actually take action in the world. So here are two really basic things that I've started to think about and ask myself when I think about having an intentional conversation with someone, since starting to intentionally build narratives with story-based strategy. Let's try to keep these in mind as we talk about narrative today. So number one is our audience. Who are you talking to and why are you talking to them? What do they care about? What are their beliefs about the world, about people, about incarceration or safety or justice? Why are you motivated to talk to them about abolition? And Gillian's portion of this workshop is going to take us really deep into understanding and investigating our own motivations a little later. But it's helpful to experiment with ways to reach various audiences rather than just thinking internally about a narrative that might reach the general public or convince the general public. It's really nice to put your audience in the front row whenever you're crafting narratives. So being specific can really add strength and creativity to our strategy. So if you're talking to a 12-year-old, that would be a different conversation than an 80-year-old. If you're talking to a person who was incarcerated, that would be different than talking to a person who tells you they're going to call the police when they hear loud music, right? Those would be two different audiences. So you would craft pretty different narratives to talk to them about abolition. Number two is underlying assumptions, unstated parts of the story or beliefs about the world that must be accepted in order to believe that a narrative is true. So This is the kind of stuff that narrative is built on, but that we don't actually usually hear in our narrative. It's an underlying assumption, right? We're going to assume that you think this is true. So dominant narratives shape and depend on underlying assumptions. People that run for office, elected officials, people who benefit from policing and incarceration, media and entertainment all make really good use of their audience's underlying assumptions to maintain buy-in to things like incarceration. And we can uproot and actually illuminate and show and challenge these underlying assumptions. And we can identify and strengthen assumptions that support abolition. So again, underlying assumptions aren't good or bad. They're always going to be with us, but it's really helpful to know that they're in play and to try to get a sense of where they are and what they are, so that whenever we're talking to somebody or even asking ourselves questions about our own beliefs and actions, we can take a look at what we might not be identifying as obvious, but that's totally impacting how we're perceiving information. So an example of a common underlying assumption is that prisons keep us safe by taking dangerous people out of communities, right? That's a narrative that a lot of these cop shows and mainstream media, news, really depend on us to kind of just accept without questioning that obviously, if there are dangerous people, and I use heavy quotation marks here because I don't believe that there are dangerous people. I believe people do harm. They are not dangerous in essence. The news media or the stories about how cops are heroes really depends on us seeing others, seeing a dangerous other that we need to be protected from. And so there's an alternative underlying assumption that I have held after many years of being around and exposed to abolitionist thinking, which is that there are many ways to address and prevent harm, but putting someone in a cage is a form of harm, not harm prevention or justice. So with practice and with a lot of conversation, I don't actually buy that dominant narrative's underlying assumption anymore. And now I can see all the cracks and fissures whenever somebody's trying to sell me a story that assumes I believe there are dangerous people I need to be protected from by the state. And instead, I see those narratives through an underlying assumption that prisons and police and cages actually do not decrease danger or harm. So I'd like you to take a moment, either in the chat or in your journal, to just name one or a few underlying assumptions that you want to challenge about prisons, police, incarceration, or punishment. What are some underlying assumptions that you see in yourself, in your community, perhaps in your parents or your friends, your family, at school, at work? What are some underlying assumptions people have that make them more susceptible to believing this dominant narrative? And Gillian, can you see the chat? Are you able to read a few?
I can see the chat, but I can only see the Zoom chat. So one that popped up is an underlying assumption: people deserve to be punished for causing harm. If we don't have prisons, we will become soft on people who've caused harm. The people in prisons deserve to be there and deserve whatever happens to them there. That prisons and police have always been here and will always be here. The PIC works to protect survivors of domestic violence. The people deserve punishment for doing crime, and the challenging crime is what we need to do. And that prisons, sorry, there's just like this flood of information, but yes, here's one from YouTube. An underlying assumption that I want to challenge is that we've always had the police. And so I think that's a couple that we can work from.
All of those are great, super on point. Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm glad that this is resonating. And yeah, I think that it can be sad to recognize that so many of our own underlying assumptions and the underlying assumptions of others have been shaped by a kind of taking away of our understanding of who we are and what we're capable of and how powerful love and community can be whenever harm happens. I feel sad when I think about these underlying assumptions, and I feel like I need to grieve the idea that so many people in my life and even myself sometimes don't see how we can keep each other safe, or how well equipped we are to navigate being in community, being in relationship. And also, I understand and want to take very seriously the fact that when you experience harm, it can feel really difficult to see beyond a desire for revenge or punishment. And I think that a lot of underlying assumptions can also kind of swing the other way. I think one opinion I have, and again, this is my own perspective, and I welcome things that push back on this, but I think that there is a way to uplift the assumption that punishment is necessary or that revenge is necessary and hold space for that and not have to have an answer for that right now. If you have an answer, wonderful. I think that it's good that we can talk about that together. But it's also something that we can just hold space for and grieve together, and really, really kind of be curious about. And when we create space to not have to have an answer, sometimes the answer will arise whenever we just hold space for each other to think and feel together. So thank you all so much for sharing those underlying assumptions. Let's challenge all of them. Okay, so when we're thinking about how we get to know our audience, where do we start? How do we get a sense of someone's narrative lenses or filters? When working to free ourselves and each other from such a strong dominant narrative, it can be really helpful to approach each and every conversation with a sense of curiosity. Asking questions and showing that you're truly interested in how someone thinks and feels can help to build trust. It can also give you valuable insight into that person's underlying assumptions and emotional responses to ideas or terms, words. Something you'll notice is, maybe somebody has a completely different emotional response to the word punishment than you do, or another kind of word like community. Maybe people have very different emotional responses to words that we assume are universally understood. At this point, I don't take emotional reactions to any word for granted. I think every person has really unique emotional responses to words and symbols. So I'm usually just pretty curious about how they feel about words that I tend to use when I try to talk about and understand abolition. I try to get a sense for how they're perceiving and defining reality. So you can try asking yourself questions about your own values, emotions, desires, and fears to practice being curious. And asking yourself questions can also really help you to identify your core values and your uncertainties, where you feel confident and where you might benefit from more research or more conversations with people who share your values or already believe in abolition. There is really immense power in accepting that you probably won't have a clear answer to every question you ask yourself or others, or every question that somebody might ask you in one of these conversations. So again, the goal is not necessarily to jump from one raft to another, right? The goal is to say, hey, we can swim in the water. We can hold curiosity and questions, and there's a lot of resources here in the void that once we decide to leave the raft of prisons and police and punishment, we can kind of swim around in that uncertainty. We don't have to jump right from a raft to another raft. Of course, there are plenty of rafts to jump to that do not involve the state having the ability to cage and harm us. We have many resources that are already working very well to keep us safe without the state's involvement. But again, it's really nice to show that we don't have to provide a flawless alternative to policing and incarceration just because we're pointing out that it's harmful. It can be really helpful to make space for yourself and others to get comfortable with not knowing or not having a complete vision of what would happen in a world with no prisons or police. And it's just so great to hold space for curiosity about what we could become as individuals and collectively. So curiosity is key here. And then sometimes that vision of abolition is a lot more clear than you might think, for yourself and for others. And asking questions can help to illuminate new possibilities or strengthen ideas that have already been planted, or connect the dots between truths that we all understand and alternatives to the dominant narrative. So sometimes a person who doesn't identify as an abolitionist will tell you a whole abolitionist story about themselves if you ask. For more on this, I really suggest checking out this piece by Benji Hart called You Are Already an Abolitionist. It's in the resources attached to this Padlet. And it gives a kind of detailed look at how the recent political chaos has really illuminated a lot of fissures and fractures and how people understand how funding works in the United States, and their perceptions of what would actually be a better use of our money. And so it makes a really nice case for helping people to just kind of connect the dots between what they know to be true and what they believe, and connecting those dots to abolitionist values. So humans are a process, right? We are not a static object. We are born, we grow, we learn, we change. I am not a thing, I am a process. Gillian is a process, right? We're not a static object here. And so we are growing. Just as the plants grow, just as societies grow, just as ideas grow, all of these things are processes. The change is inevitable. So questions can help you expand the canvas of who you're allowed to be, who you might change and grow into, and how you're allowed to be and change. So here are a few questions that I like to ask myself, and I'm going to go ahead and read them aloud, and just feel free to take them in, or if you are interested in answering some of these, or if you think of your own, you can kind of start writing them down, because that's kind of where we're headed if you hadn't guessed. But here are some questions that I really like asking myself. And again, I don't have answers to all of these, and answers have changed. Even in the span of a week, sometimes answers will change for myself. So what am I afraid of? And does the presence of police eliminate those fears? What do I imagine the police doing that I myself couldn't do with help? What kind of love and support could prevent or address the things that I'm afraid of? When have I been brave when I was afraid? Who would I call to help me manage a frightening situation? What do I actually want after I've been harmed? How do I want to be treated after I've caused harm? What myths tell me that I must be afraid of other humans? What stories have I heard that tell me that? Have any of those fears actually come true in my life? Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've partially come true. What could we nurture with resources currently used up by prisons, police, and the military? How can I help to raise children that do less harm than I do and that are better at repair? What is the difference between discomfort and harm? And finally, and this is one that I think is comes in at many levels, all the way in and all the way out. What can I love and accept about myself so that I can love and accept it in others? So let's take 3 to 5 minutes. Let's do 3 minutes here to journal. So you can feel free to answer one or a few of these questions if you want, or, which is what I recommend, I think if you want to take a few minutes and write down some of your own questions that you want to ask yourself or other people. And again, you don't need to have answers to these questions. In fact, I think it can be really great to think of questions intentionally that you don't know the answers for, and to sit with that unknowing and maintain curiosity about yourselves. So again, questions are a great way to learn more about beliefs, values, and narrative lenses. So let's go ahead and journal a few questions, or maybe answer some of these here on the screen, and we'll take 3 minutes here. Okay, we're at about 1:30, halfway through. Another 1:30 here to do some journaling. And if you've come up with a question that you're excited to share, maybe if you want to put it in the chat and Gillian can read just a few, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Okay, that's 3 minutes. Anybody got some stuff they want to share? New questions, new curiosities? Gillian, are we seeing anything in the chat or should we move on?
I don't see anything in the chat, unfortunately. And I pulled up the YouTube thing too.
Well, that's all good.
I don't know if it's a tech issue.
That's
I
okay.
apologize.
No, it's all good. No need to share either, but thank you all so much for doing that exercise. And if you do want to share any later, we'd be happy to hear them. All right, so let's talk about a pretty common starting point for these conversations. Often we find ourselves in conversation with people who think that the system should be reformed, but not abolished. So they see that there's a problem, but they aren't quite seeing past the fact that actually the system at its core is harmful. So this can be actually a really great starting point to ask questions, to figure out what specifically this person thinks isn't working about our current system, and then ask them what they think might work instead. And again, this is one of those cases where it's like, maybe you're already an abolitionist and you just need a little help connecting the dots, or maybe if I share how I feel, you'll notice that you also share some of my values and can challenge how you're still holding on to the idea that we really need prisons or police. So ask them what might work instead, and then you can offer your own abolitionist perspective. And there are so many opportunities to point out the shortcomings of reform, especially now that we've seen so many calls for reform publicly, and we have also seen them fail very publicly. We have seen body cams fail. We have seen electronic monitoring fail. We have seen all kinds of proposed reforms fail publicly. So there are a lot of people who maybe used to be really attached to the idea of reform and are now seeing it's not doing what they thought it would do or what they were told it would do. It can be helpful to familiarize yourself with the difference between reformist reforms and abolitionist efforts. So this poster is from Critical Resistance, and it's a super strong resource to get familiar with and even reference together during a conversation if the person you're talking to is interested in abolition. And what it does is it lays out various commonly proposed reforms, like building prisons and jails that claim to provide resources and services, or the use of more electronic monitoring. And there are 4 questions on this poster, which you can kind of run any reform through to see if it matches with abolitionist efforts, or if it's a reformist-oriented reform that actually gives the state more power or maintained power to cage us and harm us. So the first question is, does this reduce the number of people imprisoned under surveillance or under other forms of state control? Does this reform increase that number? Number 2 is, Does this reform reduce the reach of jails, prisons, and surveillance in our everyday lives? If it does, you might be looking at an abolitionist reform. If it expands surveillance, if it expands jails and prisons into our everyday lives, not an abolitionist reform. Does this reform create resources and infrastructures that are steady, preventative, and accessible without police and prison guard contact? So is this proposal putting resources in the hands directly of people that need them, or do they have to still interact with the incarceration system to get the resources that they need and deserve? And finally, does this effort strengthen capacities to prevent and address harm and create processes for community accountability? So this is one where people are going to be attached to the idea that punishment prevents harm. And this is where we can hold space to be curious about that, to ask them if they've seen that actually working. And if they haven't, we can maybe explore some other options with them about what might actually work, because we probably all have the shared value of wanting to experience and do less harm in our lives. And as with almost every conversation about any system, other systems will come up when we talk about the prison system and the policing system. So everything is connected. We are never just talking about eliminating police and closing every prison. We are also always talking about things like accessibility, housing, food, healthcare, care work, play, culture, education, land, gender, the concept of ownership, how we relate to children, how we relate to people that have needs, how we relate to each other in our own relationships. Harm comes in many forms, as does prevention and repair. So conversations with your community can be so helpful in identifying all of the resources you already have and what resources you might need to help keep you safe, and how they might be expanded or improved in a system where we begin to defund and take resources away from the state that they use to harm us, and instead invest in things that we know keep us safe, which are likely to come up in these conversations. And again, here's another opportunity to cast yourself and your people as characters in the story that you're telling about how things are now, about how you'd like things to be, or even about how you're worried things might be if we don't take action. The dominant narrative tells us we can only be victims or villains and that police are the heroes. We know that that's not true. So let's cast ourselves in the role of, if not hero, perhaps strong community member, caretaker, friend, someone who will take action with us and with our community. We know that transforming our world will involve the action and transformation of the people in the world. So conversations are an opportunity to envision yourself and your community taking action and transforming and working together to get us closer to that world. And here on the slide, we have a really beautiful piece of art by my friend Bria Royal. And this piece of art, the background is kind of a nice sunset gradient from blue at the top to a light orange at the bottom. And it's actually a picture of an apartment high rise with families and people living on each floor. And at the top, there's a little bubble that says, so at the very top of the building, there's a billboard that says, safety is an ecosystem. And then we see a little banner that says, accessibility, everyone can receive all the things they need to live fully. We also see a banner that says, interdependence, our well-being relies on the well-being of others. And finally, we see a banner toward the bottom that says, welcoming care, all people are worthy of love, healing, and protection. So again, if somebody tries to corner you in a conversation about prisons and police and doesn't want the conversation to move into all of the other things that that inherently involves, you don't have to hold that kind of conversation. You are not obligated to solve this problem in isolation from the other systems that are inherently connected to what we currently see as prisons and policing in our current society. All right, friends, that brings us to our break. So we are halfway through. Let's take a 15-minute break here. And when we come back, Gillian's going to talk about how we can understand our motivations when having these conversations and how we can have them in a way that doesn't depend on domination of each other, but instead allows us to converse in a way that aligns with our values. Thanks so much.
Just want to confirm, what time are we coming back? 15 is,
So let's say it's 1:19 now, so that would be 1:35.
okay, 1:35 Eastern, y'all.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's just that purple present button. Do you see it? It's right beneath the standard.
Yeah, my computer is trying to figure it out. I've clicked it a
Oh,
couple times.
oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, if we need backup, I'll ask for it. Okay. I think we're getting somewhere. Okay, wonderful. All right. Um, should we get started? Is that where we're at? All right, wonderful. Okay. So this part of the presentation is really about understanding our underlying motivations when we're having these conversations with our friends and family about abolition. Because before even considering having these conversations, you really need to know like what's driving you there. And I think even in hindsight, before this conversation, there was a motivation, there was a drive that moved you to become an abolitionist or at least consider the thought process. And I think really rooting yourself in that kind of helps you think about um, what your motivations are for wanting to share the abolitionist part of you and talk more about abolition with your friends and family. So just keep that in mind as the presentation goes. And then also like, before I flip, this is very much like rooted in water. As an image description, I have the ocean floor with some beautiful like cavernous rocks and the light hitting the floor, but very much inviting y'all to explore your depths here through this metaphor of water. Um, but really starting with this understanding of motivation, the thing that has allowed abolition to really take off during this time is all the recognition it's gotten, like positive and negative, but particularly we're talking about positive recognition. This recognition that is growing amongst communities and people and like folks internationally. It's code for resonance. It means that what we're doing within abolitionist movements and the abolitionist principles in general is really increasingly connecting with people's hearts and minds as inspiration. And this leads to others really being inspired by abolition and really being able to be led into their own practice, either in alignment with abolitionist values or really just being within their own thing as a response. And this resonance has been largely created through abolitionists holding space for ourselves, our friends, our family, and our communities. And then in rooting ourselves in this resonance, I think even more than recognition, there is this process of remembering for a lot of us, because abolition is a principle that like resists white supremacy. And so like there are so many principles and like ideas within abolition that have really been stuck in parts of us that we've forgotten or have had to abandon to survive within white supremacy. And it also is deeply connected to so many of like the traditions and cultures and ways of being that have been decimated by white supremacy. And as I go through this presentation, thinking about water, but also thinking about what I say that resonates with you, and sticking with that and receiving that as we go through. All right, so holding space. In terms of understanding abolition, I think like one of the biggest principles of it is holding space. And I've kind of broken down holding space into two concepts, although like the word and action are super subjective and have really endless meanings. But that's definitely not the debate today. I've kind of broken into two concepts, this concept of creating or taking up space, and then the concept of being held and really like leaning into that. So when we talk about abolition, it's a different space. It's an alternative to these models of punishment and control and neglect and exploitation that we see within white supremacy and that we're taught is acceptable for like holding people. And then really redirecting ourselves to this understanding of abolition as love. Abolition is like this concept that is expansive enough, I think, to really hold all of us rather than seeking to like harm or exploit or to take benefit from others. Abolition at its heart, I really feel, is an expression for our desire to love and really to say like, I won't abandon you, I won't throw you away. And then even ourselves within that. And then talking about how we hold space, there's no one way to hold space, as I said, but there are numerous ways and traditions that abolitionists have practiced this. And here are a few. Some ways we hold space, learning and unlearning and sharing knowledge with each other is one way that we traditionally hold space. Loving and caring for ourselves and others. Healing, that is one way that we hold space in community. Direct action and protest is a really big one. And that one really specifically resonates for me with the idea of taking up that space and creating like a container for all of us to be held rather than like dominated in like public space. And then centering communities and people who are subjected to disposability, marginalized folks. And then really creating the space and holding it to imagine beautiful new worlds and possibilities, as we try to do as abolitionists. And then really like diving deeper into this holding space, like something that I think it's really important to say is like holding space is a mutual relationship. If somebody is not also like contributing to the space, is not contributing to like your feelings of being held, then that's not quite holding space. It has to be mutual in relationship, or it can be unsafe at times or dependent. But really ask yourself, what is your capacity to hold space for somebody else? Are you curious about what they have to say? Or is there like an obligation there? Really try and do a gut check, or trust your intuition. I think this is something that we talk more about in conversation when me and Ruby were planning this. But particularly thinking about like folks who might be like wanting to have conversation with their parents. You know, a lot of folks also come from this like background because families are so complex of like parentification, and dynamics like that. So really like thinking about your capacity, and really thinking about like the dynamics as well, and trusting your intuition to know if you feel safe and comfortable doing that. And then with the other person, like, do they seem interested and curious in really having this conversation with you and making that space to have that conversation with you, and allowing you to be held rather than them really taking this as an opportunity to dominate the conversation or be completely dependent on you to hold and maintain and create the space and contribute. And if you feel unsure about it, what you can do is ask them questions, and take the spotlight off of yourself, and really just kind of get a check and a feel of the other person without you having to really like do all the work. And for both of you, when thinking about holding space, can you hold space for difficult feelings, for disagreement? Are you willing to create and respect boundaries within this space that you guys are creating? Because that's definitely a big part of allowing people to be held and safe. And then this is a beautiful beach scene with a quote on top of it of Bell Hooks's from her book, All About Love. Awakening to love can only happen as we let go of our obsession with power and domination. And this is kind of the beginning of our journey diving into this like ocean water situation. And I'm gonna put on some water noises as I give you guys time to like journal. Really take a moment, root yourself, and think about the person that you would like to have a conversation with about abolition. Really think about why you would want to talk to this person about abolition, and then take a moment to really consider your underlying motivations, your desire to share. And I invite you to do some journaling about this while I play some beautiful like ocean noises, if I can get it to work. Oh boy.
The audio for the video is actually working this time.
Really?
Yeah, if you just want to leave it, you can.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, let me pull it back up then. Oh boy. Wonderful. Yeah, if somebody could let me know up, you know. All right, let's continue. So we're going to continue with the bell hooks. So really considering our conversations with our friends and family, I think what's really important is this idea of acting on love, or rather rooting ourselves in a love ethic. And this formulation, this definition of love, again, comes from Bell Hooks's book, All About Love. And she understands love as an action rather than like a noun. It is something that isn't dependent on good feelings, but rather a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. And I want to describe these beautiful hearts I have. There's a heart over commitment, which is kind of like beaming outwards in some beautiful pink colors. Under knowledge, there's a purple heart with some little exclamation line dot things. On top of responsibility, there's like a blue and purple heart that's kind of like hand-drawn looking. Under trust, it's like a thumbprint heart. Under respect, there's like a scribbly pink heart. And then under care, it's like this like crystal, like shimmering pink, like gift, like gem, which is fun. Also earlier, I didn't describe this. I'm a Black person with like blue glasses and like flower daisy type pattern shirt. And that's like visually how I'm like appearing on screen. And then also feeling called to give thanks to my community and my ancestors and all my friends, because all of this knowledge you're about to receive did not come fully from me. Yes, but in the next coming slides, I have everything rooted as an affirmative and I statements. So again, thinking about that concept of resonance, when you say these short sentences back to yourself in the way of I, see what resonates and sticks with you. So thinking about love, starting with the concept of knowledge, I have this beautiful dolphin slightly under the ocean surface, smiling at us all. And for knowledge, when thinking about conversations with our friends and family and our underlying motivations within this context of love, love as in knowledge, as in a desire to give knowledge and resources to my family or friends who are interested in abolition. When sharing abolitionist thought, the desire to love rooted in knowledge is wanting to share something about myself so they know me better, or perhaps it's I want to know this person's values and share my own abolitionist values, and sitting with what resonates as an underlying motivation. And then with commitment, I have this beautiful school of fish, all committed to following each other through the ocean currents. And again, rooting ourselves in love. Where do you see yourself within loving commitment? And using the I statements, I desire to commit to showing love to my friends and family by embodying abolitionist practices. I want to commit to being patient with my friends and family in conversations about abolition. I am committed to a safer world for my friends and my family, and I want to share that commitment. And then on the next slide, I have responsibility and this beautiful protective shark out there on the ocean floor, and seeing what resonates again. I want to take responsibility for protecting my sense of safety and set boundaries. I am willing to take responsibility for my relationship with this person and be conscious of the impact of my actions. I want to take responsibility for my voice and create impact by talking about abolition. And then on the next slide, we have care. And oh my gosh, I can't remember the exact name of this beautiful sea home. It's either coral or like a sea anemone. I don't remember. I just remember that being a thing in Finding Nemo. And we also have a diver down here. But care. I desire to care about my family and friends, and I want to show them that abolition is a form of care. I care about others, and I understand that systems of punishment and incarceration are counter to that. And then under trust, I have this beautiful octopus transforming. I want to trust my friends and family with the abolitionist part of me, because that's also a form of sharing, and that sharing is love. I trust my friends and family to receive the information about abolition that they need. And I trust myself and my friends or a family member to be committed to embodying love and safety for ourselves and each other during these conversations of abolition. Respect. I have this beautiful jellyfish floating through the sea. I desire to respect the humanity of myself and my friends and family by practicing abolition and interacting with them. I respect myself and my own values and opinions, as well as my family and friends, even if we don't agree. And really rooting ourselves in all those conceptualizations of love, and anything that resonated with you, bring that with you to your conversations with your family and friends about abolition, with those intentions and thoughts in mind. And now we're going to talk about the more difficult feelings and motivations that really pop up during conversations about abolition that I've seen in my personal life and in like spaces in general. And I think especially with family, when there are such complicated histories, you have complicated feelings and motivations that pop up. And one of the biggest ones I feel like is fear. And then also seeing what resonates, but being loving about it and being forgiving if you feel this fear within you as well. I am afraid of the consequences of this person not knowing abolitionist thought. I'm afraid this person might punish me or others because they do not understand abolitionist thought. I am afraid of a world where abolition is not accepted by my friends and family. And I am afraid of my friends and family not meeting my expectations. I want my ideal version of a world community friend group with an abolitionist values. And I feel afraid or attacked when people don't agree with me. I am afraid of my friends and family being shamed or rejected by other abolitionists. I am afraid I will be rejected by other abolitionists if my family and friends don't agree with abolition. And these are things to recognize as motivations not to be in conversations, but they're not things to be recognized and shamed. These feelings need to be taken care of, but they shouldn't be centered in conversation. And then the next big one I see a lot popping up is control. I am insecure about my beliefs, and I want to tell this person about abolition so I can feel validated and affirmed. Is a big one. My abolitionist values feel inferior or superior in comparison to others' values. And I want them to believe what I believe because I'm right. I want to convince and manipulate this person to think what I think. I want someone to talk to about abolition, but I don't necessarily want to hear them or listen to them. I'm ashamed of my friends and family's opinions and values, and I want to share abolition to change them. Um, I want to control the conversation so I don't face rejection or shame from the person that I'm talking to. I want to give this information as advice without being asked. And I feel resentful and want to blame or shame others into believing abolition. And those are also feelings to take care of and often pop up in context with so many other difficult things and histories and traumas that impede our ability to connect, let alone have like difficult conversations about abolition within. And again, really focusing on how it is way, way more complex than this. This is a really simplified breakdown. There may be many, many others, many other motivations for starting conversations about abolition that I haven't thought about, or Ruby hasn't thought about within this presentation. And I also want to say there isn't a clear distinction between feelings and motivations, and instead check to see if your actions are in alignment with love, and see if there are ways you can act that better align you with that. Let's go to the next slide. Also, I have this beautiful picture, video of some fish swimming and a diver going deeper into this ocean. So other things to focus on, really focusing on gratitude. And, you know, there's been points in my life when I've been like, gratitude, like, this is difficult. Like this conversation sucks. Like, what do you mean I'm supposed to have gratitude? Like, this sucks. But, you know, especially when things suck, I feel like gratitude has been a practice that has brought me so much more resilience. And I think really centering that, especially when you need that resilience, is really important. So remembering that these conversations may be the closest you're going to get to coming to understanding somebody's experience, having respect, admiration, and appreciation for that privilege, and really endeavoring to be genuinely curious, to hear about their experience, is thoughts and feelings, building off of shared experience, create connection, and appreciating or respecting differences with a focus on gratitude. Using active listening also to create a more equal power dynamic and showing gratitude through that. And then really focusing and centering respect for each other. And even when it's difficult, using those difficulties to slowly build a relationship or a friendship from that space, and allowing yourself and the other person the space and opportunity to be autonomously changed, or rather than pushed or convinced. Also, I'm so sorry, I have to take a hot second because I'm having a tech issue.
If folks want to take a moment while Gillian is away just to stretch and move, if it feels interesting, grab a drink. Take a nice deep breath.
All right, I think I'm back. Just give me a slow second. Ruby's so used to this. I've been having tech issues for so long. But sometimes technology is just like that. We don't have control of everything, just like I was teaching a couple minutes ago. Yes, give me a hot second for this video to pop back on though.
Gillian, are you still there? Did you freeze?
All right, can you guys see video yet? No, it says that my internet connection is unstable. So perhaps, how about now? Any video? I think I'm coming back. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Let's continue. But really having gratitude that I have access to technology at all, even if it's not always working in my favor. But continue this and really centering gratitude as a form of resilience in these difficult conversations. Remembering that we're rarely going to have one conversation that transforms the other person or ourselves and makes us complete abolitionists. But each conversation, either big or small, direct or casual, has infinite possibilities to expand imaginations, illuminate new possibilities, and then in tandem, unearth really difficult emotions that can make it difficult to hold space for ourselves and others in ways that feel safe and helpful. And when those things pop up and these conversations become difficult, really giving ourselves grace, because we have to understand that we're all born into these systems of punishment and captivity that tells us that it's acceptable to hold ourselves and address problems that way. And even those of us that have been practicing abolition for years are still learning and growing, especially like thinking about like the context of like decolonization and really allowing yourself to let go of a lot of these values that we got from white supremacy. And drawing back on what's outside of white supremacy and systems outside of white supremacy, I grabbed this beautiful quote from an Aymara Indigenous scholar named Sylvia Rivera Pusikanki, and really thinking about these conversations and these conflicts and these shifts as we go deeper and deeper into ourselves and our healing, that at each point in each moment, there's no post or pre in this version of history that is not linear or teleological, but rather moves in cycles and spirals and sets out on a course without neglecting or returning to the same point. The Indigenous worldview does not conceive as history as linear as the past. The past, future is contained in the present, and really understanding that our conflicts and our healing and our past before white supremacy and colonization and our present now all coexist. And then really moving on deeper with these spirals and understanding that this isn't a linear process at all. Like these conversations, our collective healing. Is my head even in this? So sorry. Somebody should have told me. But yeah, these conversations, our healing is absolutely not linear. In fact, I would say that it moves in these spiral motions. And this graphic that I have here, unfortunately, is lifted from the Emergence Alliance. It is absolutely stolen. This is an Indigenous worldview that I learned in community with others, but I can't credit because I don't remember, and I was not able to find anybody but like white people talking about this on the internet in a lot of addiction spaces. But oftentimes, you know, when we're having these conversations and we're hitting these cyclical points that feel really, really frustrating, we feel like we're going absolutely nowhere. But if we look at it linearly, it's always going to feel like that because life isn't linear. There is no infinite growth. Like that is very much in like alignment with like a lot of this understanding of progress. And also like even this idea of like winning and domination that's like underlying white supremacy. So with each, you know, with each turn, when we're looking at it from top like down, it can look like you're going in a circle, but within like a spiral, within that worldview, each time we make it around the circle, each time we have these circular conversations, we're actually getting deeper into the healing. We're actually moving deeper into the concepts. We're actually creating more of a capacity to get to the root of these really complex issues that we've lost touch with because of white supremacy, colonialism, of these parts of ourselves that we've lost touch with because of white supremacy and colonialism, and also like ways of relating and understanding the world. And I think that that is really, really important to remember when things get difficult. And I say that because I think it gets difficult in finding these points of resilience. It's just super helpful. And then the spiral next to it is based on the concept of Cree law, Wakatoan, and essentially this spiral as an illustration of our interconnection. We are not able to separate ourselves from our family, from our clans, from our nation, from our environments. And because of that lack of separation, we have a responsibility to ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we don't have like boundaries, but it means that we understand our interconnection and our shared responsibility, and that we also understand that like as we heal ourselves and we further ourselves deeper into abolition, we begin to like affect our families. And just even without the conversation, here's the thing, because like as you deepen yourself into abolition, it moves with you, you know, like you begin to practice it. It relates to, it shapes the way you relate to other people. And then conversation also helps. But there's a reverberation that happens. As you become an abolitionist, it affects your family, it affects your community, it affects your clan. And I think leaving control, there's a lot of peace that comes from letting that process happen. And although it can look like nothing's happening, especially when you're having more difficult conversations with your family, like know again that spiral is going places. And although I only have these two models of spirals, I think there are so many other like Indigenous models of spirals that we can draw from in terms of thinking about abolition and healing that I don't have named. But I definitely encourage you all to look up and then also look more into specifically what elders say about Wakatoan and Cree law. I wish I could like embed video into this presentation, but it just was not working very well when me and Ruby were planning it. But yes.
All right, thank you so much, Gillian. I just want to take a moment to, right here in this moment, if we can all just send Gillian our gratitude for holding that complex and transformative piece for us. I think there is so much to say and do and also feel. And Gillian, I really appreciate the way that you used language and symbols to help us understand and feel the transformation that we are kind of inviting ourselves and our community, our friends and family into. So thank you. I feel like I just went through a portal and here we are on the other side. So this is our last portion of today's workshop. Go ahead and take one more big stretch if you want. And we're gonna try to get through this part and then leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So let's talk a little bit about caring in real time in conversation. As Gillian so magnificently laid out, we are obviously engaging in conversations that may impact us and others in a wide variety of ways and in very deep ways. And as humans, just like all other animals on the planet, we like to feel safe. And we're actually much more open to change when we feel safe enough to change, safe enough to be open. Our nervous systems really help us to prioritize listening to others, integrating information, connecting, and being creative when we feel safe enough, safe and connected. So expressing and embodying care when we have conversations that can bring up strong emotions like grief, sadness, anger, insecurity, regret, and fear can help us and others to recognize those feelings, to clarify those feelings, maybe differentiate between those feelings. Anger holds multitudes, right? Fear holds multitudes. And so we might want to try to make space to feel those feelings deeply, make meaning of them, and still feel safe enough to learn and change while experiencing those big emotions. And of course, we cannot guarantee safety for ourselves or anyone else. We might use words like a safe space or a brave space to try to set the terms for conversations. But just as we all have our own narrative lenses, we all also have our own understandings and experiences of safety. So what we can do is work on identifying what safety feels like for us and others, and practice engaging in ways that don't intentionally make ourselves or anyone else feel overwhelmed, overtly threatened, shut down, or unable to participate. And so the image here is just a beautiful piece of work by an artist called Anne-Marie Barrett. It features two people. It looks like a parent and a child growing corn in a field, and behind them is a nice, beautiful, big mountain in pinks, yellows, and oranges. And so the concept, and this text reads, resilience is rooted in relationship. And so the concept of resilience kind of gets tossed around a lot. And here I don't mean it to say resilience to continue taking abuse, resilience to continue existing in a world that harms us. What I mean is the resilience to actually stay present in the effort to transform that world. I think of resilience in a lot of ways, but here it's the ability to experience difficult things and still find adaptability, hope, gratitude, and connection with ourselves and each other. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic associated with a concept called the window of tolerance. And you might see this in a lot of different places. But the window of tolerance is a term coined by Dr. Dan Siegel in 1999. And it's commonly used to understand and describe very normal brain and body reactions connected to an experience of adversity, like a challenging conversation, you might say. The concept suggests that we have an optimal arousal level, or a kind of normal arousal level for us where we function well and can be present. And when we are within the window of tolerance, that window allows for the ebb and flow or ups and downs of emotions experienced by human beings. So the chart shows this window as an image of a window with a calm ocean and palm tree outside. So we may experience in conversations and in just our day-to-day life, hurt, anxiety, pain, or anger that brings us close to the edge of our window of tolerance. Or maybe it puts us all the way outside of the window into hyperarousal. Up here at the top, it's shown as a volcano, or fight flight. You might have heard that term or felt that sensation of, I'm overwhelmed and now I have energy and I feel I need to either leave or defend myself, fight or flight. So you can see the volcano here. That's when we leave our window of tolerance and we are now prioritizing safety and survival over connection. And similarly, we may feel exhausted, sad, numb, or shut down during difficult conversations and move down into the hypoarousal or freeze state. And I know this is some new terms, so feel free to just kind of look at the pictures or take what's resonating. But if you're interested, you can also look this image up. So down here, the freeze or hypoarousal state is shown with a picture of a kind of glum-looking person seated at a table with their head resting on their chin. And so once we're outside of our window of tolerance, our nervous systems and our bodies and brains, they prioritize survival and move resources away from our cognitive and connective abilities. And it kind of makes it more difficult to connect or learn or change or trust. So instead, we're defending or protecting instead of connecting. So if you're having a conversation and you realize that either you or the person you're talking to has moved out of their window of tolerance and has become really irritated or angry or shut down and disengaged, it's probably a good idea to pause, take some time to do something else, or give each other just some space. We're much more likely to have better conversations when everyone is within the window. So that doesn't mean that everyone has to be totally comfortable and happy all the time. That's not realistic. And also that's really not transformative either. We may still have difficult emotions and big disagreements, but it does mean we're not overwhelmed or feeling too threatened to connect and share and learn. Next slide, please. And so this is an image that Kai-Cheng Tom shared during her Loving Justice, Embodied Conflict Resolution and Transformative Justice workshop, which I cannot recommend enough. If you are resonating with this portion of the presentation, I definitely suggest that you go ahead and watch the video of that workshop. It's included in the materials for this workshop as well, and you can find it via Project Mila. So this expands on the idea that we are more able to change when we feel safe and connected. And this image is black text on a rainbow background, and it lists a few ways that we might feel or think, or things we might believe in each of these states. So I'm just going to read a few here at the destructive conflict, fight, flight, hyperarousal. So some mindsets that we might find ourselves in whenever we are stressed to the point of a fight, flight response is our worldview might feel like I must destroy the other or I will be destroyed. I fear being punished and resist by going on the attack. My sense of self and social survival are under threat. And we can enter this phase and this kind of feeling when we start to feel like our boundaries are not being respected. So our systems receive signal of a threat. They say my boundaries are not being respected. I now need to move away from connection and towards defense, protection. Similar down here at the bottom in the blue portion, down here towards freeze or hypoarousal, we see fawning and submitting, performative change. And I think this is common, and I think that I have experienced this in conversations when I want to appease by making promises I can't keep or saying I hold values that I actually don't understand because I'm afraid that if I don't agree, I will be rejected and lose connection. So we're really concerned about submitting and people pleasing here in the performative change. And this is a normal part of, I think, a lot of our process, and it's not something, again, to be necessarily shamed or avoided, but it's not quite as transformative as Gillian outlined, kind of autonomously coming to the transformation when we're ready and whenever it's an honest and genuine transformation. And down here all the way at the bottom, we see fragility or collapsing. So I collapse into a sense of victimhood or helplessness. I'm feeling bullied. I may become totally immobilized and disconnected from the change process. And so what we're actually looking for is, let's focus on this green area here and look at how well these thoughts and feelings in the green align themselves with creativity, confidence, curiosity, and change, which are all things we need to bring about a world without prisons and police. This is the sweet spot we can aim to get to when we really want to dream with someone. So here in this green zone, we can problem solve, feel more comfortable with people or ideas that maybe aren't so familiar to us. We might feel more capable of taking action as individuals or collectively. Maybe you felt some of this green zone when you're in a really great conversation or listening to someone speak that you really resonate with, or watching a movie or hearing a song that totally changes your perspective and helps you to understand that you are transformed, transforming, and that you are into it, enjoying it, or at least interested in and engaged and committed to that transformation. So here we see that my boundaries are respected and my questions are welcome. I seek self-accountability, growth, and challenges joyfully. I'm encouraged to be curious and seek new ways of interbeing. I have access to basic needs, personal healing, and support. So now you can understand why a system that is dependent on us not having our basic needs met also keeps us out of our window of transformation. It's very hard to feel safe if we don't know where our next meal is coming from or if we have a safe place to stay. So I feel safe enough to hear and integrate feedback. That's really what we're looking for and what we can do our best to cultivate in relationship and conversation. Next slide. So again, this is a totally non-exhaustive list. It's just something that kind of came to me as I was trying to summarize how I might think about caring for myself in a conversation that might be challenging, and also how I help myself to stay in my window of tolerance. So you can start by checking in and seeing if your very basic needs are met. If you're hungry or thirsty or tired or really stressed out, check and see if there's a way that you can make yourself more comfortable. Maybe even do a gut check if you have the capacity to have the conversation you want to have right now. And if you don't, you can always come back later. Don't think about time as scarcity. If you notice you're out of your window of tolerance during the conversation, so you're really activated, irritated, or really shut down and tired, do take a break, take some space, try again next time. How you feel really matters. And when we bring a settled, calm nervous system to a conversation, other people around us, their nervous systems can almost can very much subconsciously perceive that sense of calm and that sense of safety radiating from us. And so if we bring calm energy, there's likely to be an abundance of calm energy available to others. And then there's some reminders to care for yourself whenever you're taking on this very important work. So again, there's no binary of failure or success in these conversations. It's all part of a process that has been happening since way before we got here, and it will go on well past when we leave here. You are not solely responsible for winning abolition. This is a hard one for me to contain. I really want to take on a lot of responsibility for this idea that I treasure. But remember how many people are struggling alongside you and how much we really need each other in order to build the world we deserve. You do not have to have all of the answers. I know we've covered this, but I will say it again and again and again. Creating space for curiosity is just as valuable. And finally, you do not owe anyone disclosure about harm that you've experienced. You do not owe anyone a part of your story that you don't want to share. And you do not need to prove that you have been harmed in order to have a conversation about what we could do differently to prevent and address harm. So we have all experienced harm. We have all done harm. We will experience and do harm. You do not owe anyone disclosure just because you want to share an opinion about how we should be handling harm. Next slide, please. And let's think a little bit about caring for others. And so again, same thing. Ask how they're feeling. Maybe make sure if you want to have a nice, deep, long conversation that there are some snacks around, or that they know where the bathroom is, or just making sure basic material needs are met. Maybe, you know, have some lunch around. I always feel safe and more calm when I know I can have a snack and a drink of water if I need it. And so obviously, intense, heavy, sometimes painful topics can come up whenever we're talking about prison and police abolition. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to just avoid them because they are at the core, and the dominant narrative uses our fear of these subjects to keep us from even thinking that we're allowed to think about them or capable of managing them. So if you're unsure of how the person feels about talking about something, there are a few ways that you can ask, and I'm sure you have a lot of ways in your toolbox. Some of the things I like to say are, do you mind if I share some thoughts with you about this thing? No pressure to share if you don't want to, but I'm really curious how you feel about blank. Is it okay with you if we talk about something that might feel a little heavy? Let me know if you'd like to stop talking about this at any point. So here you're expressing that you're curious, but you don't expect them to share anything they don't want to share, and you're respecting the boundaries that they set around that. And you do have to respect those boundaries. When you respect the boundaries, that window of tolerance and trust opens more because the person knows that you are not going to push them out intentionally. And if you notice that the person is close to or has totally left their window of tolerance, they're really activated or really shut down, again, take a break, try again next time. How they feel matters. And just a few more reminders here. People are unlikely to become abolitionists in the course of one conversation, as Gillian said. Remember all of the conversations that led you to this point. It can be a really long game with many opportunities to learn along the way. And also, this is a big one for me because I'm really fascinated with how we use language as tools to indicate to processes in the world, but we may use different words to describe similar experiences. So be patient and hold space for each other to experiment with words and ideas. You can kind of experiment with how you're describing what you're trying to talk about. A difference in language doesn't automatically mean a difference in values. So how we find ways to describe something that resonates with both of us can really go a long way in how we can keep imagining together. And then I have one more slide. And then it's time to wrap up. So the conversation has ended. And you want to kind of acknowledge that this conversation has taken place if that feels nice. If it feels like, wow, this was a very important moment for me or maybe for you. I like to wrap up and be really intentional about naming that we just participated in a conversation together. So you can start with gratitude. Thank you so much for spending time on this with me today. It brings me so much joy and hope that I have people like you in my life to talk with about things that matter to me. Maybe there was a big disagreement and you do need to walk away from the conversation with some unresolved feelings or concerns. So my friend Kelly Hayes laid out this really beautiful framework and I really appreciate it. It says, obviously, we aren't going to agree today about blank, but we obviously agree about some other common ground or shared value or concern. And I feel good about that. I'm glad we both care about that. And as long as we are both committed to that, the world will be better. And then there's more gratitude of just experiencing the opportunity to know somebody else's perspective. And maybe there are just a lot of questions that got opened up. And one way to kind of really deepen these conversations is to start bringing resources in, or maybe even start a reading club together. So you might say, I'm still really curious about blank. Are you? Is it okay if we agree to share resources with each other so we can keep learning together? And this is how we can build community where questions and curiosity and practice can really bloom and take root. You can always share an article, a piece of art, or something else you'd like to talk with them about next time, or that can remind you both of your shared values and narratives. And that brings us, we have a slide here for Q&A, but that is the end of our planned presentation today. So thank you all so much. And here on this slide, we have a cool GIF of some blue sky with hands and flowers. And then there's text that says there was a life before the police and there will be a life and liberation after. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, definitely open to questions, but not sure how the Q&A works. I think there's like a little Q&A Zoom button.
Yeah, I think our moderators
like...
were keeping track for us if we have any.
Okay.
So it looks like we don't have any questions coming up in this moment. Maybe from closing out the presentation, that there are some that are bubbling for folks. So if you're in the Zoom or watching the live stream, you can pop those questions. You can pop them in the chat. You can pop them in the Q&A.
And I just want to express huge gratitude again for this opportunity. It was so great to, and Gillian, thank you so much for journeying with me on making it to this point with our presentation.
Believe it or not, because as much as we talk about conflict and not being afraid of it, and like also being a space connection, me and Ruby met over a conflict.
We did.
And so I promise you, building a friendship from a space of conflict is actually something that can happen, and that it can be generative. Yeah, absolutely. And also I'm like flipping through the chat, and I'm glad that people resonated with things that were brought up.
Yeah, Gillian, I always think of that moment where I posted an article and you called my attention to a thing I had never thought of before. And what made me, I did initially feel like, oh no, I'm being judged, I'm being attacked. And then you said, if you want to talk about this more, I'm open to talking about it. And that totally transformed my whole emotional experience of the situation. And I learned so much, and I have so much gratitude. And that's why I wanted to do this workshop with you, because I know that you're the kind of person who will hold that space and hold space for me to learn, as long as there's mutual respect. So thank you for modeling that for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think within like my sphere of love, I love learning things. I love sharing what I learn. I love people who are excited to learn new things and hear what I have to say about the things I've learned. I love people that can contribute to my knowledge. And so all of it is very exciting.
Oh yes, and big thank you to our interpreters. I'm sorry I was speaking fast at the beginning, but thank you so much for taking the accessibility seriously. And I hope that everybody had their accessibility needs met as much as possible today. Always improving.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to our interpreters.
Oh, I see a comment here in the thread. I didn't know what being an abolitionist really meant. And to my surprise, I'm really glad to find out what it means to abolish a system and be a part of a healing community. Yes, that's awesome.
I'm like bad at this too. I haven't been reading the comments, but there was a Q&A that popped up.
Oh, okay.
Okay. How do I? Okay. I'm like so not sure what I'm doing on Zoom.
Oh, here, I can read it aloud. You want me to? I got it.
Okay.
So how do we start these convos with kids whose schools are heavily militarized, like law enforcement is invited to convince them that it's a good idea to enter law enforcement because of pay, because we live in poor communities? Really, really good question. Gillian, do you have thoughts?
You know, I think it's really difficult. I feel like we kind of talked about children when we were doing this presentation. And I think like for me, what can you do to hold space for like their safety? Like these are big safety things that pop up. And it is difficult to combat manipulation, because that's what that is. It's manipulation when like these children are in situations where they're being offered opportunities when they don't have access to that. And you know, I don't have all the tools or many tools to really break through manipulative tactics. I think Ruby really kind of talked about like, just like, and I, like both of us talked about like the power of recognition and just exposure. So perhaps like exposing somebody to new perspective or children to new perspectives who are open to it. But I think really like prioritizing like safety would be where I would go for the beginning of a conversation. But it's so fluid. You really have to figure out what holding space looks like in between you and that child, because holding space looks really different for everybody. But I think if you can like really focus on like that holding space at the beginning, and making sure like they feel safe, because like there are so many safety things within that, and then maybe slowly easing, because it's like there's no linear here. So it's like, how are you going to ease down to the spiral? Like I can't fully tell you how to get to your destination. You kind of have to like feel through it. But I hope like those little droplets of breadcrumbs kind of lead you somewhere with whatever resonates within what I said. But Ruby, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's so important to treat young people with respect, which they often do not receive, because in our culture, young people are treated as if they are property of adults. I see Miriam has a beautiful resource by Jenny Vietz in the chat here. Also, again, take a look at those propaganda resources. So take a look at how the military, prisons and police tell stories about themselves, and try to intervene and ask questions and provide alternatives. You could even make fun of some of the tactics they use. You could kind of bring humor into it, depending on the age of the kids and your relationship to them. But I think especially as young children, we are very interested in engaging exciting narratives where we can see ourselves as powerful, or really just kind of creating an alternative narrative to the narrative that the military or law enforcement is bringing to children about who they can be and what it would mean to join law enforcement. Providing narratives that can go alongside that reality so that they can jump off that track when they're ready and think of themselves as having a different potential than what's being provided to them by this narrative can be really helpful. You could even collectively try to just do a writing workshop. You could ask them, what does safety feel like for you? And just have them share. They might even say, police make me feel safe, because that can be a real feeling they have, or that's a message they've received. And again, it might feel urgent to intervene and say, oh my gosh, I don't want you to think that. I don't want you to feel that. Maybe you can do that. Maybe you can express your own feelings and emotions. But more so, again, you can create space for curiosity and just be real abundant with other ways to think about their future. Give them a lot of other options to look at, because we know that we can have more enticing roles for people to fill than a cop.
I think like another thing I want to interject is like you can guide folks and you can give them resources that are open to it, but you can't fully control people. And also, I think a lot of folks within spaces, for whatever reason, they really feel responsible for each other. And I think we all have a responsibility to each other, but we can't be responsible for how people like decide to navigate their life, even if these people are like children and are younger. Like we don't have control, and so it's difficult. Or as much as you might want to like save this person from the military industrial complex, like that is outside of our boundaries. We can only share when we're invited. Yeah, it's difficult though. It's difficult with children.
I'm also curious about how you can provide different prompts in settings where kids are creating things like art or music. I think I really have benefited from being part of an artist collective and experimenting with how we communicate what we want to see in the world whenever it's not really modeled for us. So children can come up with some incredible visions of the future. invite and really value the vision that they have of who they might want to be in the world they might want to live in. It doesn't have to be in stark contrast or opposition to what we're already doing. It can be in addition to and as another option. And I see there's some resources here in the chat for folks who want to stay connected. I know there's other awesome workshops happening. I don't know if anybody from Project Mia wants to jump on and say any last things before we close out.
Oh, I have one other thing that popped up into my brain just because I feel like it might be helpful. That thing, you know, you can't control folks, but you can introduce folks to community, and then what they receive from community, they can be changed by in whatever way they feel capacity to. So if, you know, if they're constantly in community with these people who are trying to manipulate them, like moving them out of that community and maybe into like more abolitionist space, or at least space where people are mindful of that and can hold them, and also like have honest conversations if they're willing to have them, would be really helpful. Because I think a lot of these people, a lot of children end up in these situations because they don't have like any other resources or community that's telling them otherwise. If you put them in a community that tells them otherwise, again, you move into that spiral of connection. Like, it's individual to community, but it's also community to individual. Like, there's no disconnection. Yeah, but that's all I really have to say about it. Probably Mia wants to say something.
Thank y'all so much, Ruby and Gillian. It's such an amazing session, and we're so grateful to have had you facilitate and to have like this amazing depth of resources to be able to explore after this session and beyond. And so just like so much gratitude to you again, all of our interpreters, and also our captioner, Teddy, as well, Ebony on the tech page supporting. Thank you so much. We do want to invite, close by also inviting people to the other sessions that we have. We have a session happening at 4 to 6 Eastern on police-free schools. So Cops Out of Schools campaigns, and talking about the history of policing in schools, and also the organizing work that has been happening and is happening now to get them out. And then tomorrow we have 2 sessions, one from 12 to 2 on de-escalation 101, and how do you move through situations where you need to know how to de-escalate in conversation and otherwise in your community. And then also a session on from 3 to 6 on the intersections of environmental justice and abolition, bringing those 2 things together and those movements. So like really exciting stuff. We encourage folks to attend all of those. You can go to the Eventbrite link that I will pop in the chat to be able to access those and get the Zoom links for those as well. And then we also have a session on how to intervene in rape culture that's going to happen a little bit later on the July 22nd that Miriam just dropped in the chat. Thank you, Miriam. And thank y'all so much. I'm gonna drop the links for the other sessions in the chat as well if you wanna come by later today or tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon, hopefully for our next session.
Oh, forgot to also, we have to thank BCRW also. Thank you so much to BCRW for all the support on tech. We appreciate you.
Great, thank you. Bye, everybody.